Welcome to episode number 43 of Colorado TechCast. Hey everybody, Trapper here. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Colorado TechCast. Colorado TechCast is a weekly podcast where I interview CEOs and founders of Colorado-based technology startups. Join me each episode as I explore the Colorado technology community from the inside out. Today in Colorado TechCast, I'm joined by Mike Freeman. Mike is the CEO of Innosphere. Mike, thanks for joining the show today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what are you guys up to in Fort Collins?
Well, so the organization that I run is called Innosphere. We've been in business for 21 years. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have quite a unique mission is in supporting science and technology companies and entrepreneurs to start them. And that's what we started doing many, many years ago and what we still do today. Our headquarters is in Fort Collins, as you mentioned, and we really serve all of Colorado, but with a particular focus on Denver, Boulder, and Fort Collins. That's where most of the technology companies that form in the state are going to be located.
So we're at your office today. It's a sizable place. How many companies are headquartered here?
Yeah, so we're in Fort Collins, and again, that as you noted, that's our headquarters. In the mid-2000s, the city of Fort Collins and Colorado State University had a mission around elevating the amount of support available for the science and technology entrepreneurial community, and really helped us ramp up this organization. Part of that process was building 30,000 feet of office and wet lab space that would be available for entrepreneurs. And so that's where we are today. Quite a complicated financing structure, but the kind of critical things to know is that we got phenomenal support from City of Fort Collins and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, and those are kind of the two key organizations that helped us put this building together. Nice.
How long have you been with the organization?
Yes, I've been around for a long time. I tell people if you don't like what's going on in Innosphere, you can absolutely blame me at this point because I started out representing one of the major funders on the board of directors and had the opportunity to come in as CEO. So between sitting on the board and chairing the board for 5 years and then being CEO for 8, I've been here for quite a long part of the 21-year history. So that's how I got into the Innosphere. And people jokingly, ask, hey, how do you get into this line of work, Mike, you're in? And I say, hey, join a nonprofit board. You never know what's going to happen. That's my message. Because I never really saw really running the organization as part of my professional future, but being on the board and really seeing what this organization had the potential to do really motivated me to take the position here.
Why Fort Collins to run Innosphere out of? Was it just financing reasons or?
Well, that's a great question because you have to look back really over about 20 years of what's happened in the technology sector in Colorado to understand our history. And if you look back over that time period, there were multiple recessions, obviously, and one of the things that was happening in northern Colorado, because 20 years ago, most of the large employers here outside of the university were tech, and so they were more susceptible in downturns to layoffs. And what the inspiration was around Innosphere was looking to support technical people, mostly scientists and engineers that were being displaced out of larger companies who really didn't want to leave the area. And one of their only options at that point was looking at some sort of startup. And so they brought the technical expertise from their industry, usually a couple decades of experience, have a business idea, but frankly didn't really know how to put a company together, raise capital, build the team, find customers. And that's really what we do at Innosphere to this day. We work with technical founders who've been thinking and or working on an idea for usually a while, at least 10 years, and that are ready to commercialize. And we're the go-to partner. So a lot of credit has to be given to the City of Fort Collins and Colorado State University because they really were the sort of inspiration. Over time, we've expanded. So the City of Boulder and CU, Colorado School of Mines, City of Denver, Town of Castle Rock. So we have a very, very diverse group of stakeholders and funders now, which is really why we really stretch really from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins in terms of our footprint. So we have about 11 people in the organization that work directly with companies, and they're scattered out between Fort Collins, Denver, Boulder.
Okay, great. Where does the funding come from? Are you guys taking private equity money or institutional investors or cities you mentioned?
That's a great question. And if anybody out there listening has worked in a nonprofit, you know the story. It's really a hodgepodge of funding that is required to keep a nonprofit going for an extended period of time. So we look at basically our funding sources coming from a couple of different areas. Number one would be the great organizations, like CU Boulder, like CSU, like School of Mines, City of Fort Collins, City of Denver, so on, that have provided funding for us in some cases as long as 20 years. And they're really aligned around supporting the science and technology community and economic growth in their respective communities. That's why they provide funding. So that's about 20 to 25% of our funding. We have a bit of a unique model, and there is a bit of a term of art around Incubator versus Accelerator. The Incubator model generally we're nonprofit organizations that are mission aligned, typically around science and technology is sort of the common denominator. And part of our business model is to not take equity in companies. And so one of the unique things is that a company comes to Innosphere, and how they get help and they get served is they pay an annual fee of $10,000 to participate, but there's no equity. And so we think for most companies that's a better option than others. And particularly the accelerator model doesn't work really well with science and tech companies just because the commercialization period is quite long. So those, we call them client fees. Those client fees are quite significant. We work with about 35 to 40 companies a year. So about a quarter to a third of our revenue is fee-based. And then we do have real estate here in northern Colorado. So some of our operating income comes from the building where we run. And then lastly, we are a venture capital fund on top of all that. And so there are management fees that come from the fund that also come to offset some of our costs. So that's a bit of a simplified view, but if you think about those major categories of income coming in, that's how we piece it together. So not a huge organization. We're about $1.2 million budget. So but if you look at kind of where all those funds are coming from, it's a little bit complicated.
So the three buckets are schools or institutions?
Yeah, I think public sector. Yeah, universities, cities, kind of in one category. We have some great private sector supporters like Fairfield and Woods, Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber Schreck, Plant Moran, Baird. So I don't mean to exclude those. Some great bank partners like First National. So if you look kind of our funding, again, it's quite diverse, and we have a whole host of funders. And I think the thing we're really proud of is that many of our funders have been with us really from the beginning, and why they keep coming back and funding and supporting us year to year as we deliver. And we deliver through the companies we support. They create jobs, they raise capital, they sell their business and exit, create wealth events. We create investment opportunities through the companies we support. So if you look, again, that wide array of supporter, some are going to be, hey, we like the economic development around science and technology, great. The universities want us to obviously support their startups. And then there's a whole host of private funders that just frankly, want to see more science and technology economic growth in Colorado, and they like us as a sponsorship opportunity. Yeah,
it sounds like you provide a lot of great resources. So it's like Y Combinator almost, except you guys don't take equity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think if you think about in Colorado, there's some great accelerators here. Techstars obviously started in Boulder, Boomtown, Merge Lane. In the accelerator community is really important to support entrepreneurs. But when you think about companies doing advanced materials, think of battery technology, medical devices, diagnostics, software that, let's call it heavier software. I mean, I guess dating myself, I would call it enterprise, right? You think about technology in smart cities, which a lot of it's hardware focused. These are technologies and companies that just take more time to bring the tech to market. And so they lend themselves, I think, better to the incubator model where we can support a company usually over about a year and a half, sometimes even longer. And again, focused on those kind of core things, finding customers, raising capital, building the team. We don't try to, make it too complicated. If you do all those things successfully and you do them in a reasonably short period of time, chances are your business will survive. But if you fail at any three of those, that's generally why companies fail, is that can't get to market quick enough, can't get customer traction. They might get customer traction, but maybe for any number of reasons can't attract funding. If you attract the wrong team, you're not going to grow. So you just have to get all three of those kind of right in the right order generally too. So that's our core focus.
So you're supporting companies that are more inclined to write software that would go in your car versus a mobile app, right? Something that needs more development.
Absolutely. The main thing, I'm just thinking of a company just because I was talking to them earlier today. They are, you can't say this about every company certainly, but they, in my mind, are really revolutionizing how public sector organizations budget. That sounds really boring, but think about it for a minute. If you're a school district, public hospital, a city, a county, the way that those organizations have done their resource allocation or budgeting hasn't changed in 100 years or more. And you think about all the technical innovation that's come to market, guess what? Really understanding how to prioritize and allocate resources much more efficiently and effectively has not come up in the public sector, shockingly.
Right.
So, these guys are making really good progress. And it's not simple technology. You got to go and you got to understand complex government accounting, for example. You got to understand how to interface with ERP systems. It's a complex sale. You typically have to go to the top executive in the public organization and sell to them. That's not easy. Perfect company for us. Kind of really strong mission alignment. The tech's not easy. Customers, certainly all companies love more rapid customer adoption for sure. But we're really comfortable, working with companies. It takes a bit of time to get those flagship customers on board. So that's kind of our forte.
When a company joins Innosphere, what can they typically expect in terms of support services?
Yeah, so that's again core to one of the parts of our business is the whole incubation commercialization program. So it starts like really any accelerator or incubation program would with an application. We always say, hey, all good things happen with an application. Really, the process of completing the application is what's important because it forces whoever's applying, typically the CEO, to really get clear about where the business is and to also get clear about what help they think they need. So I'd say generally it takes about an hour to fill out. Once that comes in, that kind of kicks off a very specific process where we start, I think of almost as investor diligence. We're diligencing that opportunity, and they're doing the same. They're saying, hey, is Innosphere really the right organization for me to be working with? Usually, a couple of in-person meetings, more detailed review of the company, starting to get more than the application, but supporting materials will happen over about a month to 6 week period. Kind of goes faster, certainly in some cases, and slower in others. And once we get to the point where we think we have a strong value proposition for the company and the company is really clear what they're going to get from Innosphere, then we make an offer at that point for the company to become what we'd say is a client. Now, once the company is a client, depending on what time of year they joined, we like to try to time it where we have new clients coming in, generally speaking, right at the beginning of the year, summer and fall. And the reason for that is, for most companies, we'll run them through a very structured, we call onboarding program. And it really just level sets us with the company. Where are they? Are they producing all the materials to win customers and raise capital? Really the focus. So at the end of the onboarding program, which is about 3 months, the product typically is one of or two things: an investor pitch deck that is going to stand up to first encounters with real investors, and customer-facing material. So again, then the focus of got to win customers, got to raise money, got to recruit the team. So pretty basic. So once that 3 months is over, that's where I think the real value of the program is so incredibly important. We transition the company to one-on-one support with a client manager, and that client manager will usually support that company again for 6, 9, 12 months or even longer. And this is where we customize everything we do. So if the company comes out of onboarding and needs to raise a seed round of capital, which would be typical, we're going to roll our sleeves up, really fine-tune the pitch even further, help them get in front of investors, manage the process of getting in front of investors, handling feedback, ultimately understanding how to structure their deal. We don't negotiate it for them clearly, but so let's say that takes usually a couple quarters to raise money. that would be the focus of the client manager. Guess what? Most companies raise money. What's the next thing they do? Hire. So we transition our support. How are you going to build out your organization? Do you hire for a salesperson? At what level? How do you compensate them, given where the company is? At what point do you bring technology in-house that's outsourced? All these basic questions when you have money, guess what? Those are fun things to deal with. And then invariably, close on the heels is you've got to scale revenue. So then we're getting into market and sales strategy, what types of customers should be in front of. And then basically it's like a wheel, it just turns. So, hey, we start getting customer traction, things are growing, guess what? We need more money. You're back to square one. Okay, now I might do my seed 2 or an A round, depending on where they are. We're going to go back to, okay, where is the company now? Who do you raise capital from? And wheel turns again. Got to hire more people. Your customer acquisition strategy sophisticates over time. So that's, not overly simplifying, but that's a pretty typical engagement, is we're just really cycling from what's the top priority to the next over the time period that they're here at Innosphere. And so that customized service is really important.
So you're holding their hand basically from product inception to exit?
Yeah, and just in the last really about a year and a half, we've gotten more kind of clarity around where does a company go after Innosphere. And so we just announced a partnership about 3 months ago with a group in Denver called TrueSpace. And what their expertise is about $2 million in revenue to 10. And 10 million generally is accepted as a lower middle market. And the idea is that when companies hit the lower middle market, they have lots more options and continue to grow and scale this. The capital tends to start looking more like debt, which is great, versus equity. Or you're in a B round or so on, or at about 10 million in revenue. Guess what? You're on the radar of private equity at that point. And so if you're SaaS or if you have some other recurring revenue, great. There's lots of private equity looking to for takeouts at that point. So this 2 to 10 million range, that's where a lot of companies don't make it. And so we think at Innosphere we do a really good job working with the critical risk factors up to about 2 million in revenue. And now we have a continuum of service all the way to the lower middle market through TrueSpace. So we're really excited about this partnership.
So run the price by me again. You said $10,000 per
year
for all of these services you're providing.
Not TrueSpace. So once they get to that's more expensive. Okay. These are companies that are.
But everything up until that point, $10,000, and they get customized support.
Exactly. So I mean, you kind of think about it. You probably couldn't have an intern full time every year for $10,000.
No, you can't.
So furthermore, just to always show value, we bill quarterly. Because we want the companies constantly be thinking about, do I need more Innosphere service, or am I ready to, we have to say, graduate from the program? So that concept of graduation is important. Most companies graduate the Innosphere program within 14 months, and they fail within about 7. So that's, you never like to see companies fail, but sometimes people should stop working on a business. And we try to help entrepreneurs get to the point where they can make that decision with wide eyes and understand, hey, this is probably not going to work. And I should divert my time and energy to either another company or do something different. So that's a tough but important part of our process. Is you don't just come in the program and float. You have to hit business objectives while you're at Innosphere.
So what over your course here, running various companies through, what are a few common reasons the companies would ultimately fail within that short period of time?
Well, I think if you look at and this will be absolutely supported by data. So I don't think my view on this is unique whatsoever. Number one, somebody built a product the market doesn't want. Nobody's going to buy it. No uptake. Can't even get proof of concept projects. Nobody's interested, or very few. So you never kind of get beyond the early adopters. The second would be what entrepreneurs would describe as running out of money. I think that's symptoms of lots of other things, not just running out of money. It usually means, guess what, didn't get customer traction. Or, one of the hardest things we have to do is give founders of companies feedback that maybe they're not fundable. You're a great technologist, but you're probably not the CEO of the company. Unfortunately, when investors meet companies and the team is not complete, as we would say, the companies rarely to never get that feedback. So that becomes an important part of the commercialization program. Is we got to say, hey, look, you've been out, You've intersected with a dozen plus investors. You've gotten no traction. Let's talk about what's going on. What are the possible causes for this? And invariably, you're going to come back to, again, product and market. Is the team complete? Are they fundable? There's some other aspect of the business that just is a problem that's not maybe obvious face value. So that tends to be very difficult conversations to have, but that's why we're here, is to try to really help the companies be as clear as possible about what it's going to take to get to market.
So let's dive into the different services you guys provide. So in order to secure funding, how do you assist with that?
Yeah, so I think good question. I think I didn't do a great job of this earlier. Let me talk about, we basically do three things, and one of them is really easy. If you're in Northern Colorado and you're a tech company and you need real estate, we're your guys. And we have wet lab space. Okay, that's the easiest because that's real estate.
What is wet lab space?
Oh, that's for biotech companies.
Okay.
So hoods and places to do work on companies that have a biology or chemistry basis. That's the most straightforward. Great. What I've mainly been talking about is our commercialization program. And so think about, about 35, 40 companies a year coming in that really need pretty intensive support to get the company really moving. That's kind of block 2 of service. Block 3, which we haven't really covered yet, is we also have a seed fund. And so we invest in a small number, unfortunately not a huge fund, of companies that are coming into the commercialization program we run. So unlike maybe other venture capital firms, we don't really have a pipeline, I wouldn't say problem, but in the sense of we don't have to go create a pipeline. We get all these companies coming to the nonprofit Innosphere organization looking for help. We bring those companies in. We start working intensively with them. We get to know the founders extremely well. We get to know all the pluses and minuses of a company very, very quickly. And when they're raising money, guess what? We know them extraordinarily well. It's pretty straightforward. It's like, yeah, we've been working with you for three months, 6 months. You're doing your seed round of funding. We'd love to participate in that. So we're doing about 4 investments a year, seed stage, average investment in the $500,000 to $750,000 range. We're pretty close to deploying all the capital out of our first fund, and we'll be publicly launching a fund 2 early January. So that's sort of out there, but I'm giving you that
preview.
Scoop today.
Yeah. You heard it here first.
Heard it here first. So so we're hoping to raise a bigger fund and really make a bigger dent in the seed stage kind of capital gap that we have in Colorado. That's really our objective.
So are they 2 separate organizations, the Innosphere Seed and Innosphere?
Well, we call it Innosphere Fund, so we share the name. But yeah, it absolutely is a venture capital fund with the purpose of returning capital to limited partners, 100%. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes. You talk to companies, they are in the program, in the commercialization program, looking for help raising money. We're not the right fund for every company, and it is competitive. We have to pick the best deals we think we can for the limited partners that invested. So that creates some tension. We think it's actually really quite healthy in our organization. It was something we learned early over the first year. Company, we love the founders, really like what they're doing. We're saying, hey, the fund's not a fit for you, but we really want to keep going with you on commercialization. And by the way, we're going to continue to help you fundraise, even if the Innosphere fund wasn't the right option for you. So that's kind of the bittersweet part of it in some cases. Now, with a little bit bigger fund, we really want to get to the point where we can invest in about 10 to 12 seed stage deals a year versus about 4. So think about kind of almost tripling, quadrupling capacity. That's the goal. And there's a very pronounced seed stage capital gap in Colorado. Luckily, there's some more funds coming online, which is great. But we look at how many companies are getting funded in Colorado a year. In the tech sector, it's about 200. Unfortunately, about 65, 70% of the investors in all those Colorado deals don't live here. So we're like, hey, why aren't local investors capturing more local deal share? So we're not, out-of-state capital is a great thing. It's not a negative. But we think investors locally are missing opportunities. We're like, hey, we're gonna go out and capture those deals. So that's our plan.
So is that in terms of like limited partners?
Yeah. So exactly. So if you look at, there's a handful of active VC. When I say a VC fund, I mean probably more than about $50 million in assets. There's only a handful in Colorado right now. We consider ourselves micro VC. That's what Innosphere Fund is today. There's definitely micro VCs. Many of those micro VCs locally just don't lead investment rounds. So what we've discovered with Innosphere Fund, and we certainly went into it believing this would be the case, was two things were needed. One, more capital seed stage for tech companies. Again, think science and tech. And two, that we needed more lead investors. And so you look at all the data and why are there so many deals getting done out of state? Guess what? It's because out of state investors are leading deals in Colorado. That's a big part of the missing ingredient. So we think it's a critical service in effect that the fund plays. Is we've led every single deal we've invested in 100%. Do we want to lead all deals? No, it's a lot of work, right? But going into Fund 2, we absolutely are committed to leading all seed stage deals. And with a little bit bigger fund, we'll also participate in about 25% of the portfolio companies' A rounds. So we'll extend our reach a bit into the A. Those would be kind of the big differences from our Fund 1 to Fund 2 as we're planning it.
Circling back to the seed stage, and if the company's not a good fit for the Innosphere seed round, you said you would recommend or you would help them shop for financing elsewhere. What's your philosophy on that in terms of if they're not good enough for you to invest in, why would you take the risk to recommend them to somebody else to invest in?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are important in that question. Let's deal with the most obvious and easy one. If we don't think it's a good investment opportunity, just point blank, no, we're not going to recommend it to anybody. So let's start there. But in almost all cases with Innosphere Fund where we've not gotten to a conclusive outcome with a company, we absolutely have helped them get introduced to other investors. Why? Because let's take a medical device technology. Our fund is seed fund. We can't go deep in an A-B round. If it's a more capital-intensive company, we are not the right fit. We're going to say no based on that. That does not mean that's not a good investment. So that would be a classic example of a no. Many companies that we're working with Innosphere, in all likelihood, need to raise quite a lot of capital to get to market. So think not necessarily medical device, maybe a software company that's scaling that might need to go fairly deep BC round. The more capital companies raise, when you look at it from a seed perspective, the more dilution you get because in a seed fund, generally speaking, you can't participate in those future rounds. So we model it and go, hey, this is a great company. They need to raise probably 30 to 40 million to really scale and get to market. Our 500,000 irrelevant. We don't want to be 1% of the company. I'm making that up.
Yeah.
And so that's not a good fit for us. So that is almost always the case when we say no. It's because of a business fundamental in terms of our fund construct. Now, the last thing I'd say is that not many investors do this, as we understand. I'm certainly not been in this business for 40 years, but I think pretty confident when I say this. We give pretty specific, detailed explanations when we say no. And so here's a great example. We said no to a company because we didn't think the team was appropriate to scale the business. They came back at 9 months, completely retooled the team, brought 2 new executives in from their industry with decades of experience. We funded them. So we said no, gave them really specific feedback. They went and fixed the problem. They came right back. We funded them. So that's why I think you never say never unless you just don't believe in the investment. And that's a different story. And we would also give that feedback to a company. So a little bit of a nuanced answer for you, but that's one of the pluses I think of having the nonprofit and our fund bolted together. Is at the end of the day, even if a client company didn't or wasn't successful with our fund, that does not mean they won't be successful with other investors. And so we're going to carry on as long as we believe in the company and the team. We'll carry on.
Okay,
that's the model.
That's good feedback. How do you help them find money? Is it just through connections, or what does that look like when you're trying to help them shop for investors?
Yeah, and Trevor, I think that's the number one thing that companies have on their mind when they come to Innosphere. We know we need to raise money, and probably if the entrepreneur, if this is a second or third company, probably one of the things they faced in terms of major difficulty in the past was raising money. So they really recognize they need help. So there's a couple things we do. Number one is the onboarding program we run them through is absolutely designed so when you intersect with investors, you're going to be credible, 100%. That's the whole purpose, and customers for that matter. So kind of, I think of obviously slightly different material, but same thing. And so it kind of starts there. So a company that successfully comes through onboarding, has really done all the hard work, is ready to go, we're going to absolutely, in the nonprofit and the commercialization program, help them raise capital. How do you do that? A couple ways. One, we have an informal investor network that we run. It's not an angel group, so it's not to compete like with a Rocky Venture Club. That's not the idea. It's for mainly individuals, probably involved in other angel groups, maybe not, but have more of an interest in the harder tech companies. So we run investor events every quarter. That's one way to help companies get exposure. And then secondly, we look at each company separately and say, okay, you're in the clean tech space, you're hardware, and you do X. Okay, that's going to limit you to a pretty specific pool of prospective investors. And so we'll do very targeted, careful introductions to investors. Now, here's the challenge in Colorado. So we talked about the seed stage gap problem, and a lot of, 65 some odd % of companies, up to 70 some years, of companies get funded by out-of-state investors. You pretty much need to start looking outside of Colorado if you're raising money. And that's just a hard reality for entrepreneurs. They certainly will work their own networks, our networks locally, absolutely as hard as possible. But invariably, you're going to get to the point you've got to understand how to raise money out of state. So what do we do in that regard? We're not as relevant with introductions. Innosphere is pretty small. Colorado is small. It would be very, very hard for us to stay on the radar of larger funds, on the Boston area or California. So what we do is we do a lot of customized research for companies. Again, let's take the clean tech hardware example. We'll say, okay, who are companies like you out there in nationally? What can you learn about how those companies how they raise money, and most importantly, who did they raise money from? And then so we'll create a customized research package for companies. It gets a little bit difficult. We don't think we improve the odds all that much if we do a cold call to an investor versus a company. We'll definitely try that. But oftentimes it's like, hey, here's the 15, 20 investors nationally that are interested in clean tech hardware and have a resume investing in companies like yours. Give them a lot of data about their funds, who the principals are, general partners. Say, hey, you got to go out and do that work and get connected with them. So it's going to range from, hey, let's get you in front of an investor group, let's get you connected to local investors, and then let's look more globally, if you will, at who's interested in your deal, as I would say.
I still can't believe it's only $10,000 for all of the support services. It's just
it's not. That's
what's it cost?
Nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
that's we're mission driven. So.
It's really cool.
But, for a pre-revenue company, they have to think about $10,000. I mean, this is not easy. Yep. It's a hard decision for companies that are very lightly funded to not funded to really make the decision to spend $10,000. So that's kind of the thought process. We want companies to think about it. They want it to be a meaningful enough amount of money. They have to think somewhat about it, but also not be a barrier. Like, we don't think we turn great companies down because they can't find $10,000. In other words, if they have 50,000, I think that 100% would be the case. But so that's kind of the philosophy and why the nonprofit roots that kind of went into over 20 years. We really stayed true to the mission around economic development, supporting science and technology companies, and the economic growth that come from those. So we haven't really veered off of that mission.
So 20 years ago, there was AMD here, or Advanced Materials, HP.
Agilent. We have
a lot of hardware companies.
To a lesser extent, software. There were definitely more like 5-10 person firms. Some pretty significant manufacturing that like a Celestica back in the day, and then you've got some major employers like Budweiser, now InBev. So you kind of look across the landscape. It's pretty typical in a community like Fort Collins area. Healthcare is, kind of back up, government. I mean, all levels, including the university. and then healthcare, and then usually there's pretty identifiable about 20 major employers, and that's kind of really what the landscape looked like, and it was very, very heavily weighted to tech. So kind of since then, companies like Advanced Energy, Woodward, we used to call it Woodward Governor, and people still call them that, Woodward. So you look at how the economy is diversified. It's been quite significant over the last, particularly about 15 years. And then we think our unique contribution in Northern Colorado is that we're supporting about 4 to 6 local biotech companies a year coming out of Innosphere. And so think about it in a relatively small geography, that adds up and makes a big difference. And many of those companies are coming out of Colorado State. So, you can really see in the data that job creation and company formation in biotech's been happening, and we think we're a big part of that.
Yeah. So 20 years ago, if you've got just a handful of employers, you're a lot more susceptible to recession, to downturn. If HB closed down 20 years ago, the economy here would probably take a significant hit, would take a long time to recover from. But it sounds like through the work that you guys have done by supporting smaller companies, you've diversified the employers here. And
I just I know you don't mean single-handedly, because I think we if you look at real economic metrics that we collect, we think based on real data we're kind of making a dent. But yes, we'll have to look at sort of the broader economy and what's happening. And so, I think in some specific areas like biotech, and some, in certain areas of clean tech, I think there's a pretty straight line to, hey, we supported a pretty decent number of companies in those sectors. But also it's been, and I think, you look at Boulder and Denver, and I think the same thing holds true. The city government about 10 years ago really kind of got serious about, supporting more of a diversified economy. And we're part of that for sure. I mean, that's why, if you pull up the city of Denver or Fort Collins economic development plans, we're actually in them. That's kind of our gold standard. And by the way, if anybody from Boulder is listening, we'll be in Boulder eventually. But they're a great partner of ours. But I always kid our Boulder funders like, hey, we need to be in your plan. That's a gold standard. But and so, I think it's been pretty widely recognized that, going back to the some of the Michael Porter early days around this idea of clustering, that's a real thing. It's really hard to manufacture, but that's, I think, if you look at what's changed in Colorado over the last couple of decades, is that we have we have a wider array of companies in a critical concentration than we did. So if you looked at Fort Collins, and it's kind of a geeky thing, it's called an LQ quotient, and all it does is measure the relative number of jobs in a specific industry relative to your region and then also nationally. And so you kind of want to be at about a 1+ to have a reasonably high concentration in the technology sector. So if you look at, again, data from Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, that's really what's changed our last couple decades is, suddenly we have clean tech is actually, in aspects of it, are a legitimate industry. There's sizable employment. And as you look at like cable TV, for example, telecommunications and storage, all these are sort of bouncing around over the years and declining in many cases. And then other industries are popping up. And so, we look at that data pretty carefully to try to understand, where are the local economies that we're serving, sort of where are they moving, and then what's our relative kind of niche area for that. So that was kind of a longer answer maybe, but I do think this notion of having a deliberate strategy for supporting your tech entrepreneurial community, pretty critical in the whole mix. You can't give up on, got to work with your great employers, keep them here and help them expand. I mean, that's always number one in economic development. And kind of a close second typically is grow your own. Work with entrepreneurs who are already committed to your community, help them grow the business, raise money, exit eventually, all those kind of things.
With the university here in town, what impact has that had on what you guys are doing?
Huge impact. And I kind of, I'll group really the three research universities together in a sense that, where is core scientific discovery happening in global research universities? So, mine, CU, CSU, we're really, tied in with the technology transfer office just to understand what do they think is going to be coming out of the university that's commercializable. So I'll say that more generally because all three of the universities are critical for us, and we get deal flow from all of them. And then to zero in a little bit more on Fort Collins and CSU. CSU, again, the city of Fort Collins are pretty special partners for us. I mean, they literally hatched us in the early days, wrote the first check, said, hey, we're going to take a bet on this crazy thing called an incubator. And so they do play a special role for us just because they've been such longtime supporters. And then again, from a practical standpoint, having a university the size of CSU in Fort Collins, you tend to have a little bit of disproportionate impact in terms of technology creation as well. If CSU were located in the middle of Denver, it's not that they wouldn't be an important technology developer, but in a smaller community like Fort Collins, is like, hey, this really, really critical partner. So I'd say they absolutely are really important for our long-term growth and success. And just looking at CSU, just to give you a couple of data points, one of the commercialization centers is called the Energy Institute. This is one of the largest R&D energy facilities in the U.S. It's literally across the river from us. You go about 2 or 3 more miles west, there's an 80,000 square foot facility called the Research Innovation Center. And if you are doing something relatively dangerous to human health or animal health, guess what? That's where it's done. And so, they've got biocontainment. They've got facilities that are certified by FDA and EPA. If you're an entrepreneur, you cannot find these facilities very easily. And then just more recently, the CSU Vet School just created a whole new institute for diseases effectively that translate and transfer between humans and animals, called TMI, Translational Medical Institute. And so, that all just exists like in our backyard. So this is a great place to be, and that's not to diminish at all what's happening at the other research universities, but we do have a location advantage since we happen to be sitting in Fort Collins, and CSU has been a long-term supporter. So they've been really, a really key partner of ours.
So when you say you help build teams, are you looking at everybody from, you mentioned sales, so obviously that's part of it, but are you looking at like building out the CTO, CEO, if the founders aren't the right fit? Or are you looking at the technical staff? What's that look like?
Yeah, so thinking again, that kind of 3-pillar of customer capital team, I'll overgeneralize a little bit here just because, I think for our purposes we have to do that. But what would a typical team look like that comes to Innosphere? Probably, 2 to 3, maybe 4 people, probably each in their own right a technical expert in some aspect of their business. Probably don't have a lot of business experience on the team. I mean, no, they've been in business, but they haven't run them. And they haven't brought a small company to market. So that's the distinction I want to make. Perfect for us, because we want to start with number one risk factor, is there a market for the product? Well, guess what? The technical people almost always have an insight into the market that needs to be validated. So you have to start there anyway. So that would be our starting point. As we progress into the commercialization program, what's going to happen is it's going to become very obvious that there's no one thinking about marketing and sales. But the big question is, based on where you are, how much capital you have or haven't raised, how do you start that? You can't go hire an EVP of sales when the company has $100K in revenue a year. It just can't happen. So a lot of the advice we're providing is how do you build that fractional team to start, and then as you get more funding and revenue, which is usually both, how do you build the team out, and then what order do you try to go in? And there's never a right answer for that, for sure. But it is, for example, there are almost no companies we work with that need a CFO.
Just not that size yet, right?
They're not that big. Do they need accounting and CFO service? Yes. Where do you get it? In the market, fractionally. Now, at some point, you obviously you have to build the core infrastructure of the team, and I think of finance and HR as the core infrastructure. It has to come, but typically that's going to be probably in a couple million in revenue and beyond, sort of on that 2 to 10 journey, 2 million to 10 million. So that's a part of what we're really trying to help companies avoid those mistakes, is really bring too much overhead into the company too fast, where you can't really keep up, and they can't create enough offsetting revenue to sort of to take care of their piece of the overhead. So just to answer your question more specifically, in the early stages, it's almost always product, marketing, sales. almost always. And you're going to rely heavily on the founders because they're typically the technical experts. They are the CTO in a sense, maybe the CEO. They certainly will be in the short term. And then ultimately, usually beyond the seed round of funding, the question about who leads the company longer term becomes critical. Is one of the founders the CEO for the foreseeable future or not? And if not, what role do they step into? How do you find the right person to help you scale the business? So not oversimplifying, but I'd say, in the vast majority of cases, that would be pretty typical scenario for us.
And you have the networks there to kind of source those resources?
Yeah, great. You always love focusing on the wins because they're the ones you like to promote, but love the story just because it's very recent. This happens to be a good sort of example of how Innosphere works. So we met a company that came out of CU Boulder. We did a pre-seed investment with them. Part of leading up to the seed round, part of the feedback we gave the inventor early on was, we're not going to fund you in the seed stage unless you bring in somebody with some business expertise from your industry that can CEO the business. And it wasn't, again, this is an incredibly bright scientist, and in their own right, did a phenomenal job of CEO of the company. But longer term, they just didn't think that was a formula that was going to work. And so just through our network, we put some feelers out and said, hey, in the medical device industry, who's floating around Denver Boulder that could take the risk of jumping in an earlier company if there's some base funding there. And so it was awesome. It all came together. CU company, fund, went through our commercialization program, and remarkably found just the right CEO for them. So you love that to happen, as much of the time as possible. That doesn't always happen, clearly. I think it's a little bit harder right now finding really good salespeople for small companies that just understand, you're not going to have a lot of support. You got to come in and do everything in the early days. So I think that's becoming a little bit tougher for us to find right now in terms of matching.
Sales, huh?
Yeah.
So what about product? When you mentioned product as being one of the core pieces. Like, are you looking for product managers? Are you looking for people who have a marketing background, or what is that?
I'd say more maybe using the term product manager, but with a bit of a twist. In these early young companies, almost always having to work with outsourced contract manufacturers. So, really good clear sense of the product, how it needs to evolve, and then how to work with outside parties that are predominantly going to bring that product to market. So that's not always, in a bigger company, a product manager might oversee a handful of people, have a product line, and they may not really deal with all those aspects of what a small company. So we definitely see a harder transition for product managers coming out of big companies going into small companies. That a lot of times is not a great fit. So you have to, again, be pretty specific about what we mean in product management. I'd say true product managers, again, come later. When you build the infrastructure, the team out, you have probably a round of funding and beyond, because you really expect, at least we expect the founders to have that product expertise, that technical understanding. They wrote the patents, created the tech, so they're pretty sufficient for a pretty long period of time before you really need to bring true product management in. I guess the last thing I would say is that we're a pretty small organization. I've been around for a while, but I really appreciate you coming and interviewing me, because I think the critical thing for our success, just ongoing forever, is getting in front of scientists and engineers who are working on startups. So just say, if you're listening to this this podcast, definitely reach out. Go to the Innosphere website. All of our real contact information is there. Email or call us. If we're not the right fit for you, we'll try to get you to the right place. And so I just, if you're struggling kind of working on a company as early on, we're the people to reach out to. And we've got people all across the metro area, all the way down to Castle Rock. So chances are we have a client manager in your neighborhood. So I'd love to hear from you.
Sounds good. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on Colorado TechCast. You guys are doing a lot of cool things up in Fort Collins. I said it before, but for $10,000, even, it seems like a sizable investment for a company that's just getting off the ground, but you guys are providing so many resources that you can't buy in the market elsewhere. I want to wish you guys the best of luck in the future and look forward to seeing good things.
Alrighty. Thanks again for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Head on over to our website at coloradotechcast.com and hit the big subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. I'm Trapper Little, and I'll catch you again on the next episode of Colorado TechCast.